Welcome back to Interview At, where we teach you how to use the Amazon leadership principles to land your dream job. And the thing you'll hear me say over and over again is it does not matter if you're interviewing at Amazon or any other company, tech industry or otherwise. If you understand the leadership principles, can frame your stories in that context to demonstrate that you can do your job or do the job that you're targeting, you will stand out as a candidate, right? The framing elements matter, the structure matters, and understanding the question behind the question. What question did you get asked? Can I map it to a leadership principle? Yes, I can. I have a story for that. Boom, is a far better way to prepare than trying to script out all of your answers. This week's candidate is a product manager, near and dear to my heart as a career product manager who is targeting moving into a FANG company. So definitely stepping up in terms of their reach, coming outside of the industry. As a person who did not work in tech, and so it's a unique look as to how candidates who are coming from outside of the tech world talk about their jobs, talk about their roles, talk about the things that they've done, and how they approach the interview process and how that content lands. This week's leadership principle is dives deep. And the question that I asked was to try to talk about a problem where the candidate or his team, had to go several layers deep to understand a problem, what was going on, and what did they do. So let's see how they answer the question, and then we'll obviously jump in with some play-by-play. So oftentimes when you're trying to diagnose a problem, right, especially when you're working with managers and you're trying to sort things out, it's that the first answer is seldom the right one. It may feel like it's the right one, but oftentimes you got to go a few levels down to get to the actual root cause of like what happened here and how do we fix it. So specifically a problem that you had where you had to go down several layers to kind of diagnose what was going on and fix it. Let's start. What was the issue?
Yeah, unfortunately, this was a common scenario in my world in the construction industry, especially when you're dealing with specialty chemicals sold through distribution. Oftentimes, what's being installed in the field is layers and layers away from the manufacturer. However, when something negative or non-optimal happens in the field, they run straight to the manufacturer.
Just as a small practical matter, at the front end of this person's coming from outside the industry, right? Outside of tech, and he's interviewing at a tech role. So it's a good bet that I, as the interviewer, have next to nothing about their company, their job function, or whatever. So his adding little bits of kind of industry knowledge there that are simplifiers, super helpful. And I bring that up here because this is now take two on this video. So I know what's coming next, but that it's a nice little throwaway of like additive value that helps me as an interviewer as I'm processing content about an industry I know nothing about.
So there's typically this process of peeling the onion every time we would get a claim or a complaint, where you need to go through a distributor, perhaps the distributor sales rep, perhaps an independent sales rep, perhaps a field service consultant, perhaps our technical field service representative. Then you get to the GC, that may go to a subcontractor, that may then go to a field technician who has one of his young guys installing it, right? So many layers. This was actually a very important thing for us to solve throughout my career. So I always try to implement a process, especially with distribution, products sold through distribution, where we would work backwards on the premise of what can go wrong. And I took this notion as far as implementing it into our 2-day training course that we'd have at our manufacturing facility. And we'd spend 2 hours on what can go wrong. And it's to address this exact scenario. So we would train at the distributor level, at the independent rep level, at the field technician level to have a reporting with field logs. So we had a reporting system that came from the field. So whoever was installing this in the field, if they wanted to say that they were manufacturer trained or factory trained, they had to submit these field logs. And what these field logs would do is go then back up the chain. So instead of us getting a call several layers down of a problem that was happening, the first question that we could ask in these calls is, let's track the field log.
Yep.
And then you have several layers of sign off essentially on who saw that. Now, that's great in principle, as I'm sure you get it, but what happens when that doesn't happen?
I mentioned earlier that he was delivering content that was helpful in a teaching sense because he's from outside of the tech world. I don't understand his role, his company, etc. So he's doing a bit of teaching. But in the context of your answer, you have to balance teaching with how much is this is really necessary. Now, from a structure point of view, this is actually good. There's a lot of, he's building, it's helpful, all helpful. And he's asking prompting questions. You can catch that. He just asked a prompt question that he just kind of used as a driver to answer, is helping me understand where he's going. That's all great. But I get the question a lot, how long should my answer be? Only as long as it needs to be. That it's not 1 minute, it's not 3 minutes, not 10 minutes. It's only as long as it needs to be and not one word longer. And it's kind of a glib response, but it's the right response. And so I think in terms of preparation, as you think about your stories and how you talk to your interviewers, it's how much of this can you cut out? Like, will it really hurt, right? The answer if they didn't understand this little thing. I know it seems important to you oftentimes when you want to get in the weeds and you want to explain everything. It seems important, but is it really? And that's just something you need to think, because this is definitely stretching a bit long. Also, I'm aware that there's typing in the background, and that's me on my keyboard, which apparently was very squeaky. And before I figured out how to use my software, sorry.
Through the progression, with a little bit obviously more scrutiny, because a lot of times the end user is not necessarily telling you what he did right or did wrong because he doesn't want to get in trouble. So what we would often do is we would send our field technician out, and I mean, our field technician was fantastic. Industry leading guy, the best. He would jump on a plane at any time and go anywhere. So we would send him out if it was, if we couldn't rectify this through our distributor or their rep, we would send him out to the job. And what we saw was that this was a bigger opportunity to galvanize our relationship with the person having trouble in the field than to tell them that it didn't, sorry, it didn't work. You didn't have your field logs. Yep. we would actually put somebody on a plane, go out there, help them. And we quickly saw that, we had a specific project in Denver that we did this, and that customer was exponentially more loyal to us because we didn't point fingers at their guy. We didn't point fingers at the distributor. Now, we did see it as an opportunity that we needed to, train better. We needed to take ownership of it and, say, okay, well, the distributor missed the boat here. Why? And that's because we didn't communicate effectively, apparently, that these field logs were a requirement. But that's what we would do.
So what caused you to put this logbook process in place? Right? So before we get into my follow-on question about why he did this, again, it stretched a little bit long, but as far as setup goes, when you think about situation and task as the framing element for Act 1 of his answer, this was good, a lot of teaching, had to cover a lot of ground, educate me as an interviewer, probably could cut some out, all good things. So good framing element. The one, look, what's missing here is how important was this really? That's really kind of what's missing from this is how big a problem was this? How many customers did it impact? Was this kind of like a throwaway thing? I don't really have a sense of it. So it's fine to select your story to, we went multi-level down, blah, blah, but always err on the side of things that make you look more impressive. Because again, it's not about bragging and it's not about showing off or anything like that, but your job in an interview, like your goal is to get the job. And you do that by demonstrating that you have capabilities that stand above and beyond everything else from everybody else who's coming in to interview for the same role. So if this was truly his best example of this, fine. But in delivering it, how can you shape the answer a little bit better, really make clear what was at stake? Customer impact, potential revenue impact, whatever. But what was at stake here? Without it, it's up to me as an interviewer to then understand something that's not in my wheelhouse, not from my industry, not from my vertical, whatever. So I don't know. Was this important? Was this a big problem? I have no idea. And so without that framing, the setup, it definitely could have been meaningfully improved. It sounds like it's totally not standard in your industry, right? So what was the impetus?
Just knowledge of what goes on in the field. If you start to ask questions, I've been on enough projects, and our whole team had been physically on enough projects that there's so many little nuances. Products at 60 degrees, it's going to perform a little bit different than it's at 80 degrees. If you add 2% catalyst, it's going to perform a little bit differently than if you add 6% catalyst. So even myself with tons of experience, I could have drastically different results in the field, just not keeping an eye on the details, of what's the temperature, what's the catalyst percentage, how long am I mixing it, at what pressure am I pumping that, what's the substrate condition, what's the thickness, there's many different nuances that we saw always came up in the questioning process. So when a problem happened, we always got to this place anyway, asking all of these questions. Why not proactively track those variables? And by doing that, just tracking that, what measured gets done, essentially, just by tracking it itself, improve the performance of our end users in the field. And we actually saw a decrease in claims just by implementing the field log, presumably just because people had to acknowledge it.
And what metrics? You hear me say it again and again and again. Metrics, metrics, metrics. If you're going to talk about results, give them. If you leave it to the interviewer to ask for results, they're going to start questioning your competency, and they're just going to be like, this is too hard, or this is bad communicator, any number of things. But like, you mention an improvement from what to what, percentage, whatever. But like, why was that metric important? Why is that what you measured? Did it align with what you thought was going to happen? There's so much here, just from a preparation standpoint, that could have landed so much better, but ultimately it didn't. It's not a killer if this person was going for what's called an L6, kind of a senior product manager role. So it's not a red flag, but it's certainly an opportunity to shine that was missed, and it's an unforced error, and there's no reason for it. But just give me a sense of that, right? I mean, if that's a metric for we were successful, right? It was a decrease in claims. I would also imagine a decrease in, we'll call it liability cost, for lack of a better phrase. Contextualize that for me. Like, what was the decrease rate? Sure. How much money did you guys save as a result, or how much less time were you spending per year or month or whatever on these sorts of things? Just one other thing. When you're interviewing, listen for these types of questions. This is a prompt question telling you that you're not doing a good enough job, that I need more details, that you're kind of leaving things out. When you hear this, I'm helping you understand at what level you need to be delivering your content. Listen for these things. They're going to tell you what the interviewer is thinking. They're not just kind of, follow-on questions. I pre-script many of my interviews, but there's oftentimes questions that are like intentionally inserted to prompt the candidate, to let them know they're flying here, we need them here, or they're down here and we need to kind of up level the conversation a little bit.
Sure. So how we kept track of that. So I also did ISO 9001 quality control for our company. So through that ISO process, you have to have very strict logs of customer claims. And unfortunately, we didn't have a dollar value associated to it. What we did was just kept track of just sheer number of claims coming from the distribution side. Before we did the field logs, we were probably operating at about 20 to 22, somewhere in there, claims per year. And we had, the last year I was there, I believe we had 8. So, I mean, we had over probably a 60-70% reduction. But that was just one of the metrics that we had to submit with our ISO 9001 audit.
So let's play a game of what is the next logical question that I'm likely to ask here, okay? We've now talked about the situation, great. He's told me what he did, the implementation logbooks, and he delivered on sort of the promise of results. Okay. I specifically asked, what's the metric? And he said, we didn't keep dollar values associated with the claims, is it he and his team or his company, it's kind of important, didn't keep dollar values, and but that they reduced their claims about 60% from 20 to 22 down to 8. Okay. So let's throw away the question of like, why didn't you have dollar values? Because that is a logical question. Like, well, why didn't you have dollar values? It seems like if you're filing claims and you're doing an ISO process, why wouldn't you know this? But if you're just going to throw out there that we reduced the number of claims, how, right? How are you so sure about this? Is this correlative or is this causal? If you're going to make the claim that the work you did resulted in a thing, you have to make the case that your thing did it, right? And if you don't lay out how it did it, a lazy interviewer may not ask a question. They may not even notice, but a guy like me who's a bit in the weeds is going to notice this and is going to ask the question. But what was it about the books that were reducing the claims, right? I mean, having the logbooks, let's just assume people are people, right? It's not going to make someone change how they do their job. They're going to keep doing their job how they're going to do their job. So how were the logbooks specifically reducing the number of claims?
So I don't want to get too bore you with too nuanced of an answer, but
Certainly, which I appreciate.
with these products, you have to mix them in a certain manner, and a lot of times, so the packaging comes kind of pre-proportioned, and a lot of end users, it's common in our industry, they just open one, dump it into the other, mix it, and pump it. What this logbook did was enforce the idea of there were two main things that we saw. One, that they had to measure, so they were actually measuring, and then they had to observe. And we had part of it was cup test. You know, did you do a cup test? Do you have a picture of it? And that alone, I mean, we got feedback from the contractors in general that step alone of making that person actually physically mix a little bit of the cup and see that it reacted correctly.
Yep. Okay.
Was a huge preventer of error.
That's fair. Thinking more through it is like it wasn't really a log book. It's more just in the way my brain wants to process it. It's more of call it a checklist with notes, a notes field on every step of the checklist, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Be more accurate. Yeah.
Got it. So before we get into the assessment, great setup, reasonable action. Could have used a little bit more details, but never established the stakes in the setup. The results were kind of a mixed bag. Great that there was a good outcome. Didn't really land the point as to how the work product solved the problem and to what degree, and without a dollar value, and really without an assignable missing element here as to was it the company didn't keep it or just his team because he wasn't responsible, which is okay, that's fine. It's a forgivable thing. Could have been improved, but from like a targeting L6 product manager type level, someone who's kind of a couple years of experience, more than a handful of years experience, but not quite that director level. Not a bad interview. I mean, it's not bad. It's not great. It certainly could have been meaningfully improved, but that's why we do these mock interviews, to get the feedback that you're not getting, and learn how you can improve. But it was overall, good. Now let's see what the actual assessment that would have been read into the room for this candidate for Dive Deep. Candidate presented an answer that would have been a better selection for Invent and Simplify. Yeah. I'm surprised I didn't mention that here in the video. It's funny when I don't watch these and then I go back and I reread my notes. I'm like, oh yeah, I actually said a smart thing. The lack of metrics to help round out the answer was also a miss. Unfortunately, there was not enough of dive deep in this answer to support a case that the candidate can dive deep. There was a better process introduced, and likely one that would have been perceived as new and novel by contemporaries, thus making this a better selection for a different leadership principle. So, it turns out, even when I do my own review of my own work, I miss a very important point, which is, that is actually true. He didn't actually go into the how of it, right? How of the creation of it, and all of the kind of varying degrees of difficulty. And I talked a little bit about it with stakes, but this is the challenge when you're coming from outside of the tech industry and you're trying to explain something to someone. He could have been explaining fission to a teddy bear, the way he was explaining some of this stuff to me, and I would not have known what he was talking about. It makes it a bit hard. And so just as a learning matter for someone who's trying to break into tech from outside the industry, this is kind of some of the problem, right? It's not that he's not capable. This is clearly a very, very smart guy. We went through the whole interview loop and we talked and had good conversation in our follow-up session. He is a very smart guy. It's a question of how much of the knowledge is kind of trapped in his head that has become institutionalized, such that he just takes it as second nature, that I will probably understand it because he's having a conversation with me, versus what can he teach and do so in an effective way, right? Because in an interview, you've got 45 minutes to an hour. It's a person who doesn't know you. How vested are they in the process? Are they paying attention? There's a whole lot of external factors just kind of working as headwinds or tailwinds, depending on how the day is going. So when you're coming from outside the industry and have to explain a thing that can really get into the weeds, sometimes that can hamper your performance a bit, and it causes people to feel like, oh, I can't break into tech. And the reality is that one, the note about this being used for different leadership principle, fine, but just a little bit more preparation in terms of thinking about the types of questions you might get asked for the target role you're going for, and how you might answer those things with better structure, and thinking about the questions you will get asked. Just play a game with yourself. What questions might I get asked as I work through this answer? Will help you add more content and context to your answers, such that it ultimately lands better with the interviewer. So, look, I say this all the time. If you like this content or you think I'm doing a good job, liking the video is great. Subscribing to the channel is super awesome. Definitely appreciate it. We're still doing our free interviews at interviewatt.com. So if you want to sign up for a free mock interview, you can go ahead and do that. And you know what? I enjoy doing these. I've had a lot of help in my kind of come up and throughout my career, and I'm now many decades into my career. And so this is just a small way that I can give back and help out people who are, they're time crunched and they're at a big stress point and they're trying to up-level their lives and they're trying to get that next great job and they're really stressed about it. Where can you go for the feedback you need? Where can you go to get the help and guidance from someone who's done it? I've run a multi-billion-dollar revenue business. I've worked in startups, large companies, you name it, I've done it. I've had a very, very fortunate career and I've had a lot of help along the way. And so this is just one way that I like to give back and help every one of you.